Howdy my friends, it's Carpo again. Now this video, hopefully I'm not intruded upon by the rain too much. I'm in the school bus, that's where I sit when I've got the sheep behind me here. And this video is the video I intended on doing earlier, but really I got sidetracked with basically kind of a preamble, a 15-minute video before this, in something else I wanted, to get across, which was, to stop blaming each other and to stop fighting amongst ourselves. And this left and right identity politics is killing us. But the question, I guess, that everyone would ask is, well then, who is the enemy? Where are all these problems coming from? And we know that it's a multifaceted problem. The issues that we face in society and this nation are many. There's a plentitude, and they are interwoven. So even the top economists really don't understand, where something will lead. We've made mistakes. We might think a great investment, if it was as simple as an equation or an algorithm, it's getting there. Well, some people do use algorithms. In fact, Wall Street is run by algorithms now. Instead of men standing around, it's all just computers, and that's the future we're going to. And that's part of the problem. Everything's becoming automated. Therefore, there's less jobs. And we're stuck with this frustration that there's no jobs, there's more people, and we want to blame the government. I watched something earlier where they were saying that the government should create several jobs, to help people have guaranteed jobs. And I thought, that is a great idea in theory. But in practice, if there's a job, that means there's a demand for something. You don't need to create a demand just to pay people for, there could be a different way that could work. In other words, if some of these were publicly funded through our tax dollars, getting people back to work is important. But we're facing big problems right now, and we're fighting about the wrong things. The biggest problems are the corporations. And the corporations lobby Congress, they lobby politicians, and they're their bread and butter. And as soon as these people leave, they go through a revolving door from Congress. They call it the revolving door because they work for a company like Monsanto, and then they get into Congress, into politics, and then they lobby for the company they work for, then they're right back out, go work for the company again. And Big Pharma is a huge problem with that. But there's this old term, too big to fail, and it just disgusts me. I thought, they're too big to fail, they always get the bail, they never go to jail. And that's pretty fucking stale. Cheesy as that sounds, that's how I feel. They always manage to have the money to get themselves out of the situation. And this is where my argument starts, or my gripe here. Now, the free market, as they call it, allows for these corporations to get fairly large. And when they get too large, government wants to step in and regulate them. And I'm still on the fence about, whether when a company gets to a certain size they should be broken up. But this really depends on each individual case. But the major issue here is that these companies don't just work their way to the top. They work their way to the top by pushing other competition down. And there are some low-down dirty tactics. And they pass laws and lobby Congress to pass these laws which assist them in doing so. So they lobby to weaken the laws that protect the consumer in order to protect themselves more. We all know this. The corporations answer to their shareholders, okay, not to the public. And unfortunately, this is where we get to the issue of whether or not we should privatize our prisons, our schools, our military, and we're turning all these things over to these people who end up not being responsible for the things they do, which I'll get to in the next video, which is about all the war, different, bullshit that's happened to the soldiers during war. But the privatizing of certain aspects of our society can have benefits, but it can also have drawbacks, meaning that they're not, held liable if anything goes wrong, and they don't have the people's interest, they have their shareholders' interest. And that's the thing we have to remember, is people work for their shareholders. So the banks and corporations, they can afford to take risks. They can take risks on large companies, and huge companies can take risks because they have the assets to do so. But also they can take huge legal risks, knowing that if they get sued or something goes wrong, then they're planned for that contingency and they can just pay people off. And this is what happens in the pharmaceutical industry. They build up their profits. They charge way too much for a drug. Any competition is completely silenced. Right when their patent's about to expire, they'll file for an extension, which means that the generic companies can't start making generics, and these smaller companies end up suffering, and there is no competition. The free market doesn't exist because of the laws that are protecting these corporations. So it prevents small businesses from growing, and one of the largest problems is that innovation is held back. The US is falling behind. We've fallen behind in healthcare, in education, and definitely innovation is stifled by the greed. And the problem is that people are afraid to invent. They're afraid to create. They're afraid to even start a business, knowing that there are patent trolls out there, companies who have spent billions of dollars buying up patents on things that never existed in order to, just in case somebody ever makes it, they can sue them. There are many cases of computer companies that were working on a project and then somebody else knew where that project would lead or what kind of component they might need for it, or even the keyboard layout, and they patent that and then sue the company so they can make millions. This kind of frivolous lawsuit is just bullshit. And because of that, I believe that patent protection and intellectual property needs to be really reassessed. I don't think people should own ideas. And I know that sounds extreme, and a lot of people would say, wait, if people can't own their ideas, they won't create. I would say at this point, we've created a lot. And I don't think that innovation is going to stop because we take away the protection. If the protection helped the small business, that would be okay. But a small business doesn't have the money to hire a lawyer for $200,000 to fight a case against a patent troll. And the fact is, all of them end up paying up, and many of them end up going out of business. Companies that may have invented something really amazing, people who really have it in their heart. See, this idea of trickle-down economics, that if a company is paid off and their taxes are cut, then it's going to help the consumer, it's going to help the employee. Complete bullshit. It's never worked. They've been talking about it for decades and it just doesn't happen. The wage gap's gotten larger. I mean, you can look at the facts and figures. Look at where people are and where we could be with all of this supposed rich American money that we have. The wage gap is proof, and much of it is from what I call the lazy rich. And the lazy rich are the large portion of extremely wealthy in this country who had their wealth passed down to them instead of earned it. Because very few people who are rich, that rich, earned it. A lot of them started out poor. Like, there are people who grew, but if you even got a couple $1 million to start with, that really helps. And so the lazy rich are the ones who want to direct society, but have never worked an actual day in their life. The ones who want to cut benefits and cut insurance and Social Security to people who need it just because they've always had everything paid for. The lazy rich should not be determining anything as far as I'm concerned. We could get into that for a whole separate video. But so the wage is about the same, I guess, as it was in 1979 overall when you adjust for inflation. And the regulations that they claim would help us all aren't helping. They're only helping the large companies. We have the revolving door, as I said. Then we have Citizens United, which basically says, yes, corporations are people, and now they can be treated like people. Meaning corporations can vote like people, and they're protected like people. It's who benefits? Follow the money. Always follow the money. One of the biggest issues we face is that the poorest always suffer the most. Through fines, fees, and license suspension, somebody could get pulled over, get a ticket for not wearing a seatbelt, not be able to pay the fine, and in the end end up doing jail time and owing thousands of dollars. It's robbery. It's the way the system's set up isn't working, and a lot of areas are changing these principles, and that's in some places making it worse, like in Seattle, where now anybody who, even felons are getting out of jail, and they don't have the room in the jails, and they're, kind of just ignoring. There's people on the street, they had a whole list of, homeless people who had 40 to 50 different, charges and counts against them because they keep getting in and coming out. What we're trying to do is address the problem of jail and prisons and the way we handle things, but we're not addressing it properly because many of these are mental health issues. But nobody's helping that. We push people away. It's all about the profits. So the poorest suffer the most because they can't afford mentally or physically to work, sometimes they're disabled, and we have to remember that. Not everybody is just mooching off the system. Most people want to do something with their lives, but there are a lot of mooches too. But let me just say this, even with all the mooches, even with all the people who may abuse the system, abuse welfare or food stamps, you could combine all of them, and they wouldn't even be 1% of the amount of abuse the rich do to this country. The amount of trillions of dollars that are siphoned out of our tax dollars every year, and the over $500 billion that goes to the military to fight what? For what cause? For what reasons? To fight communism, right? Now it's terrorism. And there's always been the faceless enemy. So, as I said, the idea of intellectual property, I think it's going to have to go by the wayside if we're ever going to get over this. That's just my opinion. But the idea, who owns ideas? Who owns medicine that was invented 100 years ago by people who are already dead? Every new car is based upon a frame, body, windows, engine, tires. All these things were invented by us, the people, not corporations. So people do the innovating. If anything, maybe have patent protection for things for maybe 4 or 5 years, and then say, hey, it's open game, it's fair game. How much money do you have to make? But it's not just about what companies make, it's about what we're losing as a society because of it. And then we're not adding in, a lot of these people aren't adding any new value. In other words, they just have the money to buy a product and start reselling it for way too much money, not caring about the quality or the people, the consumer. Pharmaceutical companies have huge funds set aside to just pay people off who file, suits, because they know that they're going to get sued. And they do all the time. They paid out billions of dollars in lawsuits, in the last couple of years. So it's nothing because of the amount they charge. It's pretty sad. But so our government officials create tariffs and taxes and embargoes as if that's supposed to protect the country. But it ends up hurting people. We start taxing steel from China, and guess what? All the American companies that use that steel start suffering. You think that you can rob Peter to pay Paul, or you can cancel this and it's going to save the American people, and it doesn't work that way. And we have all these great heroes in Congress or in the White House that think that they can just save the day, and everything's crumbling around us because of the corporate welfare. Corporate welfare is far worse than people's welfare. I mean, the amount of money that corporations are given. Think about the bailout. People say, well, the bailout 2008, if we didn't do it, we would have been screwed. Say, who would have been screwed? And why does nobody go to jail? How come when the average citizen doesn't pay a traffic ticket, they go to jail? But, if the CEO or a person who works, which happened at the Wells Fargo, the lady who opened up, hundreds or if not thousands of fake accounts, and lied her ass off to the government, she may have lost her job, but she was given, I think, over $100 million in a compensation package. So what they have is these pawns that say, well, you do this for our company, and if anything ever happens, we'll take care of you. Don't worry about it. We've got your back. They do the same thing to politicians. Say, we got your back. If anything happens, we'll pay it. And so we vote against our own interests by blaming other countries, by blaming other colors, other races, males, females, getting hung up on, everything under the sun. And, the irony being, like, for example, many of the so-called red states, a lot of the people, in Trump country, they suffer the most. The truth is that many of the red states use most of the welfare, and they're the ones that need it the most. Yet supporting a person who wants to eliminate that welfare, not realizing what's really going on. It's not people's fault. We don't need to fight and say, you're an idiot and you're an idiot, but say, here's the real information. Let's talk about it together, because we're not going to get anywhere calling each other names. So welfare was stated as social insurance. I heard that from someone. And I can agree with that. In a way, it's a small amount to pay for keeping a society somewhat better than it would be without it. Things need to be worked out, of course. But we're looking at the wrong problems. The amount of money that is paid out, to... it's nothing compared to what's being given to the corporations right now. They have robbed our country of everything. and they have their people in Congress. They set up their shop in D.C., you know, like with Microsoft and with Amazon, these companies that the government says, hey, we want a piece of the pie. And so, you know, they cater to that. It's like anybody who gets too big ends up having to play by the government's rules, and it's just this constant exchange of bullshit. So, there's a lot of BS out there, but that's about as much as I want to cover right now. I think that if you know what's the answer? What do we do, right? If I'm going to sit here and say, yeah, the problem is these corporations and the banks, we all know that, but what do we do about it? Just be aware, and most importantly, don't believe what you hear. Don't believe the propaganda. If somebody is screaming really loud from one side and it sounds suspicious, be careful, be aware. Often things aren't as exciting as we want them to be. This is why the news channels now have to spruce up their news with all these crazy graphics and everything and these banners, which didn't exist when I was a kid. It was just the news. And we're still getting more value from our local news. And we should use that as kind of a microcosm. When something is smaller, when a company is smaller, or an organization is smaller, or a police force, and they only answer to their own community, then they know the repercussions if they do wrong. And that includes businesses. But the larger a corporation gets, the more faceless it becomes. And therefore, nobody has to answer directly. And then a corporation becomes a person, as they did with Citizens United, and still doesn't have to answer to anybody. So, the shareholders are the answer. But that's enough for now. Hopefully I've covered enough complaining. Yeah. Be well. Be aware. And most of all, don't argue with your fellow man about stupid shit like left and right identity politics, when we've got far bigger things going on in the world right now. But to each his own. Or her own. Or its own. Whatever you may identify with. A rock. A tree. Take care, my friends. I'll talk to you all soon. Thanks for watching. Be well.
Carpo's channels, Carpo's channels, Carpo's channels, Carpo's channels, Carpo's channels, Carpo's channels, Carpo's channels. Carpo's channels. Yeah.